Hey everyone, we should be live. Please let us be live. Hey everyone, today we're gonna have a very special episode of Mitch's Minute. We're gonna be trying something a little bit different. Instead of covering general topics that have happened throughout the course of the week, we're gonna pick a very specific subject and kind of talk about it in terms of like what it kind of, how we interpret it, how we like kind of see it, and before we get started on anything else, though, today, I did want to let you guys know that the channel will be, as of this recording, we are running into some slight technical difficulties with the channel. But as far as I can tell you, the launch for Save Point City will be July 8th. But I will keep you guys updated. I'll tell you guys next week if that's going to change. I don't think it is, but I have to just let you guys know when, like, there might be an issue later on or something that we haven't foreseen or something like that. Everything is just being prepped right now for the upload and all that. So it's just I don't know. I've never been more concerned about the launch of something before. It's not that it's like super bad. It's more like I want to make sure everything works well and everything's where it needs to be and all that stuff. But today I'm going to be joined by Ren Fraser.
Hello.
Who is nice enough to come on when everyone else was busy or caught up in traffic or Ren, this is your third episode like in a row. How does it feel?
It is interesting. It is definitely interesting. I've never actually been part of like a podcast thing before, so it's kind of fun.
Well, welcome to the show where no one knows what they're doing, and we all kind of just wing it half the time. That being said, though, today's episode, I did want to talk about something kind of that I've been doing for a little bit now. I have been Dungeon Master for the last, I'm gonna say, year and a half, 2 years maybe now. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons not a long time. I've been playing for a couple years now. And something that I kind of wanted to talk about was storytelling through dice. So this idea that like as a writer, how is it that, you have like look for homebrew stories and stuff like that. As a storyteller, how do you try to get your tale to be told through players, their actions, and how you kind of finagle the situation when things isn't exactly where you need it to be. But that being said, before we go into it real quick, Ren, what is your experience with playing role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, etc.?
It's mostly D&D 5th Ed. I did a little bit of 4th Ed before as well, but mostly 5th Ed. I've always done it as a player. I now actually have the guides for like being a DM, and I'm trying to plan a homebrew campaign. I think I should probably try and run a few one-shots before I actually launch it, just to get a feel for how it actually is to be DM before I try and guide a bunch of people through any sort of longish and over intricate story plot, because that's probably going to be what I'm trying to do, because I never make things easy on myself.
I mean, I would say for a first time DM, that is a good idea. That's what I ended up doing was I had a bunch of like little one shots or very short campaigns. So there was a general concept of what needed to be done, and then the players would go about and do it. Of course, as everyone who ever knows me knows, I am no cookie cutter, and every one of my campaign, even my short ideas, were some weird hopscotch of like, you guys must go to a magical music festival on the beach to make sure that the music festival goes well, and that the Kraken made of lava and like fucking falling earth won't destroy the entire beach. And it's like, oh fuck, like I don't know. The ideas are always like you want to have.
And then go on mission to spooky ghost skeleton castle.
Dude, I cannot tell you. Okay, so I have as a DM when I first started off, a lot of I never liked the idea of running a different, like, someone else's base campaign. I don't know why. I think it's just something about the idea of having, like, of just being able to be like, oh, well, you know, you get to do this and this and this, and like on the spot kind of like storytelling, and on the spot like NPCs and stuff like that. Like there's a freedom that comes with it that I think I prefer.
Yeah.
There's dumb situations where it's like, oh, well, you know, you guys walk into a bar, and then in your mind you create this scenario where it's like you have all the bar folk, you have the bartender, and you have to then you make a level, essentially like a video game level in your head, and you have the players go in and they get to interact with whatever they so choose, and it's your job as the DM to then make the level either as you wrote it down before, or as you if you're like me, on the spot, where it's like, oh, well, there's an NPC that is a gnome Elton John, and you just gotta deal with that, and, you know, have fun.
Gotta run with it.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, like, even when you do plan things out, I'm pretty sure there's like a pretty big emphasis on improvising your way through it, just because players, no matter how well you know the people who are playing the characters, aren't necessarily going to just follow the dots of your story. I mean, sometimes that is a good thing. Sometimes it is that you have this one person who really wants to break the campaign for some reason.
Well, I lucked out. I haven't had anyone who purposely wanted to destroy the campaign. But like, so let me put it this way. There has been a time in which I built a culture and world that had very specific rules, and I had a player who kind of went against those rules, and because he went against one aspect of that world, it snowballed into a large avalanche of problems, and just kept getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never had a player who just actively fought against things that I was like saying or doing or anything like that. So I mean, I've lucked out hardcore. I've heard nightmare stories from everyone else I've ever talked to who was a DM. I know, like, I do kind of wish Amanda was here, just because she and Nate and like a couple other people we know, like, they have DM experiences. So maybe we'll come and revisit this topic at one point or another. But
yeah,
I have been. Go ahead.
You know, there's also the joy of people who will accidentally break your campaign. I was on one and a couple of us, we were the kind of people who, we don't want to break it, but we want to try and figure out where it's going in advance, and knew just enough about like the tropes and the lore that the DM was using that he thought was obscure, but I guess we also just do this obscure stuff, and he was like, why do you know what this is? And I'm like, because I think I saw the same cartoon as you when I was a child. And it was kind of like really funny that we could sort of like preempt certain things in the story, not because we were trying to wreck it, but just because we were like, ooh, I know where this is going, and I get my hands in there.
I lucked the fuck out because a lot of things that like I use as a base for my storytelling is either not too obscure, but a lot of it's like what I will do is I will take, like, let's say something Norse related, right? So like Baldur, Sigurd, Hizurk, Bjorn, Ragnar, all those like all those like Nordic characters, Vikings and stuff like that. And what I'll do is I'll be like, all right, I'll just make them into, like, I'll combine two of them and be like, all right, combine two, take these traits away, change the stories a bit, you know, so that players, you know, they can't just be like, oh, I know exactly what's happening.
It's like, oh, this is Loki, he's gonna do this stuff.
Right. So, like, for example, there is a campaign in which I had like my players had to interact with like some aspect of Thor, right? Some like character who archetypally is like Thor, God of Thunder. And so what I did was I was like, okay, well, let's take the story, let's take the bit with him and Jorgenmonder or Jorgenmonder, and have it so that like that battle that's supposed to happen in Ragnarok has already happened. What happened to him? Yada, yada, yada. And so what I did was I was like, all right, he still exists. He's frozen in ice somewhere at the bottom of the bottom of the ocean. And the idea is like, that's where that character is. Will you ever interact with him? I don't fucking know. But like, I try to build a lore. Well, yeah, the idea is that you, as a storyteller, and my biggest hint I could give to you as someone who wants to be a DM, is your players are going to do whatever the fuck they want. It's your job to kind of guide certain aspects of it, and to what I would recommend is building a foundation. Build some, like, especially if it's magic based, build a lore foundation for how the world functions. What happened to the world? Even if it's just a small chunk of it, you want to know, like, all right, so these are the gods, these are, this is the religion, this is the culture, my inspirations come from this, and this, and research.
Also, having consistency makes it easier for you to, like, if characters encounter a thing that you weren't expecting them to, having that sort of consistent background makes it easier to make something up on the fly that isn't going to wildly contradict things that you'd previously established.
Yeah, and it helps with just like, if the world feels natural, not only to the players but to you, then it will be easier to improvise. It will be easier to like set up things. There was this so there, like, not like, once again, kind of using experiences. I built a Polynesian themed arc, like area, and the idea is that this is where the players start off, this is their culture, this is their whatever, and the idea is that, like, when they dealt with animals and creatures, the concept was, because there's not a lot of Polynesian stuff to pull from lore wise in terms of like what people are usually seeing, I was able to have fun with it, mix and match ideas, take names, do whatever I needed to do, and as long as it all feels cohesive, it works. One of the things that I didn't like with how, because that's the thing, a lot of campaigns, and I don't like going this way with my campaigns, but a lot of campaigns go with like medieval fantasy, and I'm about to do my first medieval fantasy campaign like Wednesday. One of the things that I had to do was like, well, I don't like traditional medieval fantasy. It's not, I feel it's trite, it's overplayed. So what did I decide to do was I was like, well, I'll just take all the magic from the world. And the idea is that, like, there's still little snippets of, like, little, like, pieces of magic throughout the world. And that means something. And, like, there's still, like, base level magicians around, but that's it. Elves are gone, dwarves are gone, fucking everyone else who exists in that world is enslaved. And only humans exist. The idea, it was very inspired by Tolkien, Middle Earth, real life, 876 Viking times, Norway, stuff like that. A little bit of
making that change. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Banner Saga, stuff like that. Like, the idea is to have that kind of, to have that cohesiveness and to build that base, to build that story. And then kind of now the plan is like, all right, so now my favorite part of DMing is getting to hear what all of you guys get to come up with, because what's your story? Tell me what your ambitions are. Tell me what your character wants. I have a campaign in which Gang Mudo just made a character named Peppa Pig, and it's just this big buff pig monster woman who's just. And like
that sounds delightful.
And that's another aspect of DMing, is how much are you willing to kind of play loose with it. So, like, for example, there's players who are like, this is my character. This, like, I built a paladin. My character is, lawful good. I'm always this way. I have a religion. I have these aspects, and I'm, I have to follow these very specific things. And some DMs love that. Obviously, you built a character into an archetype, and you are working with that character. And then there's Gangmudo, who builds Peppa Pig. And Peppa Pig is a character where, get this, Gangmudo doesn't have a sheet. She just, every week she shows up, and we just kind of have to roll with whatever she gives us. So, like, I have in my, so like, for example, she doesn't have her strength stat, but I'm like, okay, well, roll, because you told me that Peppa is like stupidly buff, roll your dice, add a +3 or add a plus whatever. And then you kind of have to work with some players that way. Now, obviously, not every DM's going to have a Peppa Pig situation where...
No, though I have encountered a couple games where one guy was really insistent that he play a penguin and really wanted the DM to react to the penguinness and was not very happy when the DM refused to, because the DM was actually trying to run a story.
Well, and that's the thing. So, like, I feel like as a DM, you have to have expectations. I'm not gonna lie, I've gotten very frustrated because of situations in which I built a world and a culture and something that I worked very hard on my storytelling. As a writer, I consider myself someone who's like, you know, I may not be the best at everything, but I will say that I take pride in my ability to tell a compelling story. And it hurts when you feel like the players are actively ignoring an aspect of your world, or they're actively ignoring a culture that you established because their character, it's writer's conflict. It's the idea is you can't. The more people you add to a script or to a novel, the more muddled it becomes, because everyone has their own interpretations of how these characters should act. And they essentially, as the DM, ironically, despite you having to build the way that the story goes chapter by chapter, you ironically have the least amount of power, because the players will then decide their own character arcs, their own way of doing things. And it is your job to kind of work together with them. So you will be making compromises. There might be character arcs that you don't necessarily see coming. Like, some characters will develop relationships with each other. I've had a campaign where players were genuinely like interested in dating one another, and then having that kind of fall apart, or like have that fetter because of arbitrary character developments and stuff like that, where it's just like, you know, like as people, they didn't quite get along, and so it's like, well, that kind of fell wayside because of whatever, like, you know. And so, as no story you ever tell will be perfect, and no story you ever tell as a DM will be the one that you want at the end of the day, but the satisfaction comes from, did you tell a story that not only that you're proud of, but that the players who played the game with you, did they enjoy the ride? And I think
because it's a collaborative thing. You have to make sure that everybody's a part of it. And like, where the DM has to make some concessions, so do the players, because at the end of the day, they are still playing within the DM's world.
Like, yes, and I think that at the end of the day, like, I'm trying Pathfinder for the first time on Wednesday, and like, I am genuinely like, I do not know the system. I have taken glances at it, but for the story I am telling, I think that will work. In the chat, in the chat, Stoic, the Dragon Eater, hi Stoic, you asked the question, will y'all do Warhammer? I've actually gone to a hobby shop before that had like Warhammer stuff. The aesthetic really interests me, but I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wait like until I've been doing this for maybe like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, like not a year and a half. I've been doing it for a year and a half. Like, give me like, I'm gonna try Pathfinder for this next one, and then see how that goes. And then like, if I feel compelled enough to do a story with the Warhammer system, then I will.
Yeah, and that's kind of the other thing about being a DM. You have to make sure that the story you're trying to tell is actually one that can be told effectively within your system. Because some gaming systems, they can be wildly different, despite technically being advertised as being the same kind of genre. So,
Well, let me tell you of a situation in which I as a DM, I felt like betrayed by the system. And then, because a lot of this is me telling you warnings about, hey, as a DM, you got to watch out for these things.
I'll take them. I mean, I want to try it, so if I know what to avoid.
So, as a DM, everyone has a specific genre they like to tell, right? Just like how every storyteller or every director or every writer has a genre that they prefer. Over the course of all my DMing, I have found out that I am really into telling horror stories. I love creating scary scenarios and monsters and having my players have panic attacks and, like, not purposely giving them panic attacks, but, like, getting them riled up.
Giving them the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, getting them stressed out, getting them, like, knowing that, like, you created a scenario that was so real to them and to their character that they feared for the safety, not only for the safety, but they also feared in general from the horror monster that you made.
Yeah.
And I love that so much. One of the things that I will warn you, though, as a DM, is if you try to do that, you have to make sure you keep track of what your players have. So,
yep.
I'm assuming you're going to play online like a lot of people do, where it's like everyone has their own sheets at home and all that stuff. And, you can't really... You're kind of like having them all roll their own dice or using Roll20 or something like that.
Yeah.
One thing I will warn you about is when a player picks a class and you're trying to set up a horror scenario, look up exactly what that class can do. Because I made a horrible mistake a couple weeks ago where I had players go into, like, the scary mines, right? Like, they have to go into the mines and there's like thin, ghostly, naked people running, running across the walls like spiders, and you have nudity is a really good tool to use for horror. People feel very uncomfortable with nudity. But, this idea was like, I presented them a scary, like, serpent-like woman who had, like, faces where her eyes should be, and had multiple arms, and centipede-like, was a long serpentine-like body with centipede-like arms and hinges and all that shit. And then
that sounds like a pretty cool monster.
And the players were like, "Oh God!" And I was like, "Yes, I got the reaction I wanted out of them. I wanted them to fear this creature." And then, wham, bam, thank you, man. Fucking, one of my players just goes and just starts wailing on this thing because I forgot that monks have like 6 attacks. Like I just genuinely forgot in that moment. That it was just like, oh, that's right. And then I'm like, oh, how much HP did I give this character? Not that much. And so, like, I fucked up on my end because I just didn't keep track of, like, what items they were possessing, what their class abilities were, and that's negligence on my end. And so one of the things I've actually have grown to hate about 5e, and just a little bit here and there, is the level system and how people automatically get things just by leveling through the game. And so that's why when we start the sessions on Wednesday, I'm like, well, I want to kind of lean in a little bit more towards the more horror adventure. I want to lean into, some other things like, some strange stuff. And so what I'm doing is I studied up on what makes a good horror game function. And I'm like, all right, so
Pathfinder would work better for it. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I mean, I've had some DMs where, like, we had a monk in the group, and they couldn't just automatically get their skills at a certain level. They had to find a teacher to teach them the skills at that level.
Exactly.
And who they found for that teacher, like, the DM made sure that they would find a teacher, but who they found for their teacher could have consequences later in the narrative, kind of a thing. Which I thought was kind of interesting. Though, in terms of, like, screwing up because you forgot something about your character, I was once playing a game where the DM totally missed the fact that I was playing a non-binary character. Because, like, I only ever used, like, they, them pronouns to refer to this character, but I never, like, explicitly went out of my way to go, hi, this character doesn't actually have a gender. And so he threw us into this area where all of the female characters were meant to be reacting to magic in one way, and all the male ones were reacting in another way. And then I was like, but wait, what am I doing? Then he was like, wait, what do you mean, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't fit into this. And he's like, oh, shit. And I kind of ended up breaking the boss fight because he forgot or didn't notice that I wouldn't have been affected by the magic in the way he had thought my character was supposed to be.
Oh my god, it's so real. It's so real because you know what I forget all the time is like I try to set up these horror scenarios and I was like, well, so for all the players, you all have to be tieflings, but I'm going to create subsects of tieflings for you guys to be.
Mhm.
And then I forget that tieflings have dark vision, and I'm like, well, fuck, because dark vision ruins all of my horror scenarios. So what I did is I created, so in the mine shaft area that I was talking about earlier, the idea is that there's illusionary crystals in the mines that they're mining out. What it's doing is it creates illusionary effects and the spell darkness throughout the area. Just naturally it does that. And so by doing that, it helps create the scenario where they're in right now, and it gives this eerie sense of presence that anything can be in the dark. Another player then made like these little helmets with flashlights on them or little torch lights on them, and the idea was every time you see the light, like from the edge of the lights, you see fingers kind of like scurry away.
Ooh.
And I don't know, I'm such a bitch baby when it comes to horror. I love making horror scenarios. I find it so fun.
You like being in control, whereas when you're the player in a horror scenario, you rarely have control. And I think that's probably like the dichotomy of it for you, because like even when you're talking before, you like to be the creator and the controller of the thing, and you get that definitely a lot more as a DM than you do as a player.
And that's the thing. I when I started off playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was very much I was a player. I didn't get a chance to DM often. And when I would create characters and I would create these archetypes for them and I'd create these story bits, but as I've gone, I used to miss being a player. But to be honest with you, as time goes on, I think it's just more fun for me to create the scenario. It's more fun for me to have to kind of experiment and see what works and what doesn't work in terms of not only storytelling but gameplay storytelling. How you like what rewards make a player's work. For example, there's another campaign that I'm running, and I have essentially the players have never won a boss fight until 6 months into the campaign. But when they finally did, there was this giant sense of relief. There was this giant sense of, like, we finally did it. And I think that because they stuck with it... And
the greater the challenge, the greater the accomplishment.
Right. And because up until then, what I did was I made it so that every fight had this bittersweet moment. You won the fight, but at what cost? Or you won the fight, but, did you, though? And, like...
Yeah. But did it actually win? Did you actually win it, or did they just trick you?
Oh yeah. And like the things that I like with that in mind is that I as a storyteller or as the dungeon master, as the kind of the one setting up all these obstacles, it's like I purposely put this I purposely set it up so that they wouldn't win for a very long time, so that when they did finally get a pure 100% victory, they would feel something. They would feel accomplishment, and then they would cherish that accomplishment.
So I feel like you need a very specific kind of player set for those things, because there are some people where if you invite them into a game like that, they're going to get very frustrated and angry with the game, and then you end up like losing your players. So it's kind of a balance of what is the game you're trying to run and what is the game that you can run with the people who are playing it.
Oh yeah, because that's the thing. I luck out. All my players that I have in my campaigns, all of them are DMs or like players who have played in other campaigns. So like they're veteran players, and even those who aren't veteran players, like Gangmudo or Josh or someone like that, they're creative enough, they're goofy enough, they have enough of like a creative incentive to at least work with me and see how the story goes. Like the thing that I like the most is that we're getting to the final, we're getting to some of this final stuff. It has been almost a year of this campaign, and we are getting into like the nitty gritty. They have 2 big missions to go, and then they have the final boss, and then that's the end of the campaign. But to get to those points, it's going to take a very long time. The journey takes a long time. The adventure has to not be drawn out, but the idea is that there's side quests. There's other things they could do to prepare for the final fight, and to have that stuff to prepare and to kind of. I want my players to care. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Every DM, as a universal tip, make your players care. It's one thing when a player makes their character and they make their character, they make it so that, like, my name is Rorik, and I am a dwarf, and I wield a giant sword, and I have a backstory, and most players will make their character with this idea of, like, grand adventure and glory in mind. It is your job to then fulfill their requests, but also to give to kind of divert their expectations, which is a phrase that is very commonly troublesome in movies today. But
but there's a difference between diverting expectations through clever narrative tricks and then just everything is a false red herring and you switch what's actually happening at the absolute last second. One of those, it's like, you should be able to look back on things in the campaign and go, how did I not know that it was going in this direction? Not, why are we in space now? We were never, this is not a sci-fi setting, why are we in space?
Right, and I think on that topic, it is also, like, it kind of goes back to having that, continuity, have that consistency of theme. For example, I know that I've kind of fucked up a couple times here and there with consistency of theme. But one of the I guess because I can't go on for like an hour talking about DM stuff, but without getting getting the other DMs and getting other players involved, because it's just me and you talking about this.
Yeah.
But what I will say is this: general tips and tricks for like DMs is this: if you want a story you want to tell, go ahead and tell that story, but just know that there's a very good chance that the players are probably going to do something that diverts your expectations. It does they'll do something you're not expecting, and you have to then take what you know of your own story and your own groundwork and try to work and weave your way into things. I would say that the biggest flaw of a DM, of a dungeon master, of a storyteller, or who does this sort of thing, that does a free world kind of campaign, is you shouldn't write too much down.
No. And it's not even just the players that can subvert things. If the dice just aren't giving the players the successes and the things that you need them to succeed at.
Oh my god, yeah. There's so many situations and times in which the dice rolls have just fucked someone over. And like then all of a sudden you have to kind of roll with the dice, and you kind of have to roll the punches, see what you can do. I would say that, like, if you want to be a DM, I would say that it's intimidating, but go for it. Go try it out. Give it a shot. It might not be your thing, but at least you tried it. And like, I have had more fun as a DM than I ever had as a player. Because one of the things that I just genuinely like to see is how my players kind of react to the world I build, the problems I build, the just everything kind of. I don't know. One of my biggest compliments I ever got as a DM was creating that horror scenario and having my players just be genuinely scared, or having my characters care. I had players cry and be upset and be genuinely upset because I hurt another NPC, not even a player, an NPC that they liked and loved and have grown to love and care about, and I kidnapped that character.
Oh no.
And there was this moment of like everyone genuinely hating the scenario and hating the situation that they were placed in, because they were like, well, fuck, we need to go get him back. And for me, that was the first time I ever had this real satisfaction of like, well, I'm doing something right. I have to be doing something right. So I'm going to end it here today, just because if we do talk about this subject again, which I feel like I feel like we will, just because everyone here does play D&D. I mean, everyone here on the show plays Dungeons and Dragons to some degree, shape, or form. So what I'll do is I will put a bookmark on this topic, and we will come back to it another time.
Yeah, there's definitely more stuff I can talk about it for. So
yeah. So real quick, guys, thank you guys so much for watching another episode of Mitch's Minute. I'd like to thank all of you guys for continuing to support us through Patreon. Make sure you give this video a like, comment, and subscribe, and all that stuff, and all that fun stuff. I'm not sure if the bell notification works, but you should try to give it a shot. And hey, if you have any stories that you want to share with us about your Dungeons and Dragons experience, or hey, if you want to, give us game recommendations, read some emails and other stuff, we do have an email in the description down below. You can email us at savepointcity@gmail.com. Ren, thank you so much for coming back on for the show.
Yeah.
It's always fun to have you, and I hope that we can catch you again. You're becoming less of a guest and more of like a reoccurring feature.
And I am okay with that.
All right. All right, guys. We'll catch you guys next time.
See yous.